You ever boot up an old game just to check something, and suddenly it's 3 a.m. and you're knee-deep in a dungeon you've already cleared 12 times? Yeah, for me, that's the Bethesda effect. Their games pull you back in the moment you convince yourself you've finally moved on. It seems to work, every time. There's a bit of an uncomfortable truth nobody really wants to admit. Bethesda's biggest problem isn't Starfield, or Fallout 76, or whatever remaster they're selling this week. It's us, the players who keep showing up. Think about it. Any other studio drops 2 disappointing games across a decade, they pretty much vanish. Lights off, doors locked, goodbye forever. But Bethesda could re-release Skyrim on a toaster and we'd be like, yo, kinda tempted. We drag them online, we roast them in group chats, we swear we're done, and then Todd Howard whispers, it just works. And suddenly we're reinstalling Fallout 4 like nothing happened. And that's why this video exists, not to dunk on Bethesda, but to talk about why we, the people who know better, keep giving them the softest safety net in gaming history, why we hold them to lower standards than every other studio, and why we forgive things we wouldn't tolerate from anyone else. Once you see the pattern, it's kinda hard to unsee it. If you grew up gaming in the 2000s or early 2010s, Bethesda wasn't just a typical game studio. They dropped massive open worlds in front of you and said, alright, go see what happens. And man, we did. Morrowind, Oblivion, Fallout 3, Skyrim, these were worlds that pulled you in so deep you'd resurface wondering what year it was. Everyone has that one story, the moment you accidentally swung at a chicken and triggered a nationwide manhunt, or when you wandered into a cave you were absolutely not leveled for but decided, yeah, I can take this, moments before being obliterated. Bethesda excelled at giving players the feeling that anything could happen, usually because the game wasn't entirely sure what was supposed to happen either. That unpredictability and messy but charming freedom hit at the exact time many of us were forming our tastes and hobbies. These were the games we booted up after school, sank into during long summer breaks, or played at 3 a.m., forgetting where the time went. So it's no wonder the nostalgia hits like a truck. Those hours of gaming sessions built those core memories. And memories age like fine wine, even if the games didn't. That's why Bethesda still occupies this emotional real estate no other studio can touch. Those early experiences built a bond way deeper than I liked their games. It's closer to, this studio shaped how I see video games. That's the foundation everything else sits on, because we have to admit just how much the old stuff meant to us. For all the love we had for old Bethesda, you'd expect their modern stumbles to push people away, but somehow, every time they trip, some of the fanbase turns into the world's most patient support group. If another studio launches a broken game, we light the torches, gather the pitchforks, and start writing eulogies before the first patch drops. When Bethesda launched Fallout 76, we roasted it mercilessly, and then half of us quietly reinstalled it 6 months later just to see if it's better. Starfield launches and feels like it teleported straight out of 2011. We drag it on social media, laugh at the NPCs who stare like they're buffering, and then spend 80 hours building ships anyway. Meanwhile, look at CD Projekt Red. Cyberpunk launches rough, they spend years fixing it, they drop massive free updates, and some people still side-eye them like they personally kicked their dog. But Bethesda, they walk into the room with the same energy as, hey, sorry I'm late, traffic was crazy. In this case, traffic being bugs, dated engines, missing features, and quests that feel like deja vu in HD. Why should we just let it slide? Some of it's nostalgia, some of it's loyalty, some of it's that mysterious Todd Howard charm where he talks and you suddenly want to believe again. And some of it is just plain comfort. Bethesda games feel familiar, even when they're buggy. It creates this weird cycle where we get mad, we say we're done, we complain to our friends, but we never actually close the door. We still tune in and pay attention. We still hope the next update or expansion will bring back the magic we remember. And that's the part no one really wants to admit. Bethesda doesn't survive their mistakes because of clever marketing or perfect design. They survive because we refuse to let go. And that sets the stage for an even bigger problem. We say we're fed up, and we want innovation. We say we want the old Bethesda back. But the second they repackage something from 2011, we're standing at the checkout like, yeah, okay, one more time won't hurt. Skyrim has been released so many times, it practically has more versions than Pokemon. Every time the joke makes the rounds, everyone laughs, everyone memes it to death, and then sales quietly spike again like clockwork. And now we recently get Fallout 4's Anniversary Edition. Everyone on social media acted like it was the final straw, the moment we collectively said, "Nope, that's it, we're done." Then it launched, and guess what? It sold again. Despite the major issues it launched with, let's not pretend the Creation Club didn't get the same treatment. We made fun of it for turning free mods into paid add-ons, but people still hit that purchase button. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to let Bethesda know that, yeah, they can keep going down that path and still make bank. And in the gaming industry, nothing speaks louder than money. Not Steam reviews or Reddit threads, money is the only feedback that gets read. So when we buy these re-releases, add-ons, small content bundles that cost more than they should, we're sending a message loud and clear. We think we're protesting and pushing back. Sometimes we even think our complaints matter, but companies don't track volume of complaints first. They track volume of sales. And because Bethesda keeps selling these things successfully, they don't feel pressured to evolve. They don't feel like they need to reinvent the wheel or like they have to catch up to studios pushing the genre forward. Why risk something bold when nostalgia alone pays the bills? Because from their perspective, the plan is working. The money's coming in, the old games still chart, the brand loyalty is seemingly ironclad. So why should Bethesda change? Well, they won't until we change what we expect from them. But I suppose that brings us to an even bigger issue. The expectations we do have are stuck in a completely different era. There's an intriguing contradiction in all of this. We want modern Bethesda to deliver the kind of magic that old Bethesda made look effortless, while completely ignoring the fact that the studio making games today isn't the same one we grew up with. Back then, their games felt massive, surprising, and weird in the best ways. Now, things are slower, safer, and heavily monetized. And if we're being real, you can practically feel the pressure of corporate spreadsheets in the dialogue system. But emotionally, we're still chasing the feeling we had the first time we stepped out of the sewers in Oblivion, or woke up in that cart in Skyrim, or crawled out of Vault 101. We want that spark again, even though the landscape around Bethesda has completely changed. Meanwhile, the rest of the industry didn't wait around. Baldur's Gate 3 practically rewrote what players expect from role-playing. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is taking immersion to a level Bethesda hasn't touched in a decade. Elden Ring reshaped open-world design with stuff players still talk about daily. Cyberpunk 2.0 proved a studio can fall, get back up, and sprint past the competition. Everyone evolved and raised the bar. Everyone looked at the 2010s and said, yeah, we can do better. But with Bethesda, we're still hoping for a return to form, even while they're stuck wrestling with an engine older than some of the people watching this video. The things that once felt charmingly rough now feel dated. The quirks that used to be funny now break immersion. The formula we once loved feels copied, stretched, and thinned out. And yet, deep down, we still expect them to pull off another miracle. We expect the next game to recapture the feeling we had when we were younger, and the next world to grab us the way their old ones did. But that expectation isn't really fair, not to Bethesda or ourselves. Because today's Bethesda isn't the scrappy underdog experimenting with ideas. They're a giant studio trying to keep up with other studios that rebuilt themselves from the ground up. And we, the players, are still sitting here waiting for lightning to strike twice in the same place. That gap, between who they were and who they are, creates this constant disappointment loop. The crazy part is we keep walking into it willingly, hoping that, this time, they'll go back to the magic formula. But nostalgia can't carry a studio forever. Here's the thing nobody really says out loud. A lot of us didn't just play Bethesda games, we grew up alongside them. Their worlds weren't just backdrops, they were entire chapters of our lives. Skyrim was more than an RPG. It was the game you played when you needed an escape from school stress, or when you just wanted a world that didn't shove a million notifications in your face. The music alone can teleport you back to a totally different version of yourself. Fallout 3 was more than just a post-apocalyptic story. It was the place where you learned that exploration could be pretty chaotic, unpredictable, and genuinely exciting. It was the first time many of us realized that a game could feel almost limitless. Oblivion was more than just a fantasy adventure. It was one of the first times a world felt alive, even if half the NPCs talked like they were reading from an ancient prophecy written 5 minutes before recording. And don't even get me started on the mods. Entire communities sprung up around them. People making new quests, new systems, new stories, all because Bethesda accidentally created the greatest playground modders could ask for. YouTube channels, Twitch streams, Reddit threads, friend groups, so much of gaming culture grew out of those worlds. So when modern Bethesda stumbles, it doesn't just hit us as, oh, the game's not that great. It hits deeper because it feels like watching something you cared about drift further from what made it special. For a lot of us, these games shaped our tastes. They shaped our sense of exploration and how we judge RPGs. Some of us wouldn't even be into open world games if not for these titles. This connection, the emotional weight, the nostalgia, the memories, it becomes a kind of loyalty that's hard to break. Not because we're blind, but because the bond was built during a time when those experiences meant more. When a studio becomes part of your life story, it's unbelievably hard to step back and look at them the way you look at everyone else. But loyalty has a downside, because when it gets too strong, it lowers our standards without us even noticing. Here's the part of the conversation where everyone kind of looks away for a second, because this one's on us too. Over the years, we got so used to Bethesda's quirks that we stopped calling them quirks and started calling them charm. And while the older games really were charming in their weird, unpredictable ways, modern Bethesda games don't hit the same. But they still get judged with a softer touch than anything else in the genre. When Starfield dropped, players pointed out stiff NPCs, repetitive quests, and worlds that felt like movie sets waiting for actors to show up. And yeah, people complained loudly, but at the same time, tons of players shrugged and said, well, that's just Bethesda, as if the studio couldn't be held to modern standards because that's not who they are. Imagine if another studio tried that approach today. People would probably riot. But with Bethesda, we quietly accept it because deep down, we don't expect them to compete with the games that dominate the genre now. We don't really expect them to reach the level of Baldur's Gate 3's storytelling, or Kingdom Come's immersion, or Cyberpunk's rebuild, or Elden Ring's world design. We just hope and say, they'll get there eventually, even though eventually hasn't shown up in a long time. And because we've softened the expectations for them, the games end up feeling like they're stuck in a time capsule. Not terrible, just trapped. They hit the basics, they scratch the nostalgia, they echo the old formula, but they don't innovate or push the genre forward anymore, not the way other studios do with every new release. What's interesting is that even when players list the flaws like shallow dialogue, predictable quest loops, NPCs that feel like background props, they still spend dozens of hours in these worlds, not because the design is groundbreaking now, but because the older magic tricks still sort of work on us. We want better. We want evolution. We want something that feels like it belongs in the current decade. But the second a new Bethesda game lands, all that ambition goes out the window, and we settle right back into old habits. Instead of saying, this isn't enough anymore, we say, at least it's kind of familiar. And familiarity becomes a safety net that catches Bethesda every time. But that safety net comes with a cost, because lowering the bar doesn't push a studio forward. It keeps them frozen in place, and rewards them for hitting the bare minimum, while punishing them for taking risks. And that's how we end up stuck in this loop where Bethesda keeps making games that feel older than they should, and some of us keep nodding along like it's fine. But the loop won't last forever, because their next game isn't just another release, it's the one that everything is riding on. And now that brings us to the giant shadow hanging over everything, The Elder Scrolls 6. This isn't just a game announcement anymore, it's become a legend, part hype, part prophecy, part coping mechanism for people still clinging to the Bethesda they remember. Every time Todd Howard says, "Don't worry, it's coming," the internet reacts like someone teased a rare celestial event we're all pretending won't take another decade to show up. But here's the uncomfortable reality. Elder Scrolls 6 is basically carrying more expectations than any RPG in modern history. And that's not because of what Bethesda has done recently, it's because of what we've projected onto it. This one game is supposed to bring back the golden era, recapture the feeling of Skyrim, prove Bethesda still has it, compete with studios that evolved light years ahead, and somehow ignore the fact that development pipelines now move at glacial speed. It's basically being treated like a miracle cure, not just for Bethesda's reputation, but for our nostalgia. The game is already under impossible pressure before we've even seen it. The longer the wait stretches on, the higher the expectations climb. And the longer Bethesda sits on this thing, the more the landscape around them moves forward, leaving them further behind each year. By the time Elder Scrolls 6 arrives, players will have hundreds of modern RPGs to compare it to. Worlds that feel alive, dialogue systems that flow naturally, cities that behave like real places instead of carefully arranged sets, engines built from the ground up to make interactions smoother instead of duct taping new features onto tech that's been patched for multiple console generations. And the scary part? Bethesda still hasn't escaped the limitations that held Starfield back. The tech is aging, the design philosophy is caught between two eras, and the competition is hitting their stride while Bethesda tries to catch up. So while Elder Scrolls 6 will almost certainly sell enormous numbers, that's not the concern. The concern is the gap between what we want and what Bethesda can realistically deliver. We're not asking for a new Elder Scrolls. We're asking for the return of a feeling we haven't had since the earlier days. No studio on Earth can manufacture that on command. And deep down, we know the expectations are unreasonable, but we hold on to them anyway. Because if Elder Scrolls 6 isn't the masterpiece we've built in our heads, then we're forced to face a truth we've avoided for years. The Bethesda we're waiting for doesn't exist anymore. And that's a hard thing to admit, not because we're in denial, but because our entire relationship with their games was built during a different time in our lives, when everything felt bigger and more magical. But the industry moved on, the technology moved on, the players moved on. Bethesda didn't. Elder Scrolls 6 might be incredible. It might be good. It might be fine. But whatever it becomes, it won't magically reset the last decade. It won't bring back the era we're nostalgic for, because that era existed in a time, a place, and a version of ourselves we've outgrown. Bethesda isn't just running out of time. They're running out of the unconditional belief that kept them afloat. And if they truly want to matter in the next era of gaming, they'll need to earn something they haven't had to earn in a long time. Trust built on what they create now, instead of what they created so many years ago. Let me know what you think. Can Bethesda regain that spark? Or are we holding on to that nostalgia and hope? Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, feel free to hit like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.